They told you freedom had a number, and it was 65. Work hard, stay loyal, climb the ladder without falling, and eventually, you'd be free. Free to travel, to rest, to finally live. They sold retirement as a paradise at the end of the assembly line, the final reward for decades of obedience. But what if that promise was never real? What if it was just the softest kind of control? A story spun to keep you producing, complying, enduring, without ever questioning the price. From the beginning, the blueprint was clear. Study, get a job, work 40 years, then vanish into freedom. But have you ever stopped to ask, who wrote that script? And who benefits when you follow it blindly? The truth at the end of that path isn't liberation, it's confusion. A 2020 study from Stanford's Center on Longevity found that within just 18 months of retirement, two-thirds of retirees feel lost. Not because they ran out of money, but because they ran out of self. Their role is gone. Their name on the door, erased. The purpose that once gave their days structure, vanished. Because the system never taught them how to be free. It only taught them how to function. They were trained to serve a machine, not to live beyond it. Retirement isn't the prize. It's the off switch. A polite farewell masked as a celebration. When the curtain falls, no one tells you what to do next. And that silence is where the existential dread creeps in. Who are you when there are no more emails, no more meetings, no more titles to prove your worth? For decades, your value was tethered to output, not to being, not to presence, not to soul. Now suddenly, you're expected to know how to live, after a lifetime of being told only how to work. Retirement was never about freedom, it was about utility. It was never meant to reconnect you with what matters. It was meant to usher you out gently. That's the genius of the illusion. It doesn't sound cruel, it sounds like a gift. But what it really gives you is the mirror. And finally the question, who were you before the role? Alan Watts once said, "You are under no obligation to be the person you were told to be." That one line unravels the entire myth of retirement. Because if you were never meant to follow someone else's script, then retirement isn't the closing of a chapter. It's the moment you realize the book was never written by you at all. And that realization doesn't comfort, it stings, because it drags a deeper question into the light. What does it actually mean to be free? If you've spent your entire life waiting for permission to live, have you really lived at all? We are taught to postpone everything that makes life rich. Joy, stillness, wonder. We delay them in service of the real world, as if life only begins once the work is done. But life doesn't wait for retirement. It never did. It's been unfolding all along, while we were too busy preparing for it to even notice. So maybe the lie isn't just about retirement. Maybe the real deception was that freedom was something you had to earn, something that arrived later. But what if it wasn't? What if freedom was never a finish line? What if it was a mindset, a way of moving through the world that was always available to you, at any point? If only someone had told you. But no one did, because a truly free person can't be shaped. They can't be directed, boxed in, or sold a plan. They don't need a script, and that makes them very difficult to control. Retirement, then, is not a reward. It's a reckoning, a subtle, bitter reminder that you traded most of your days for a promise that was never real. And now you're left wondering, what could life have been if I had started living it sooner? But to understand how this illusion took root, you have to step back, zoom out, and examine the machine that shaped you long before you even had the words to question it. Because what we call normal life isn't natural. It's designed, structured, manufactured. In the 20th century, something changed. Human life became industrialized. Not just our labor, but our identities. We were sorted, molded, standardized. Life was chopped into neat stages: education, employment, retirement, death. From the moment you enter the world, the path is already drawn. Sit still, follow rules, raise your hand, get good grades, then pick a job, clock in, clock out, repeat. 40 years of this. And if you're lucky, a few quiet years before it all ends. But here's the truth they never taught you in school. Retirement was never made for your soul. It was made for the system, not to free you, but to manage your usefulness. The idea of retirement didn't begin with generosity. It began in 1889, when German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck introduced it, not as a gift to the people, but as a method, a way to clear the workforce of the aging and make space for younger, faster, more efficient labor. It was economic strategy wrapped in the language of compassion, and over time we accepted the story as truth. The system never asked what kind of life you dreamed of. It only asked, what kind of worker can you become? And quietly, over years and decades, it began to measure your worth by your usefulness, not your essence, not your soul. You weren't encouraged to ask why you were working, only how well you could perform. You weren't taught to question the routine, only how to optimize it. In 2007, the American Psychological Association published a study called The Retiring Mind. Its conclusion was unsettling. Modern humans have rarely designed their own lives. They simply follow blueprints laid out by others. And if you're honest with yourself, isn't that what most of us have done? We inherit a formula. We follow the path. We spend our most alive years clocking 47, 50, sometimes 60 hours a week, without ever stopping to ask, what am I really building? Who is this serving? This is the deeper illusion, that your life belongs to you, when in truth it's been mapped, scheduled, and sold since the day you entered the system. School was never about curiosity. It was training for obedience. Work was never about meaning. It was extraction of your time, your energy, your spark. And retirement? That's the quiet dismissal, when your productivity wanes and the machine no longer requires you. The entire architecture wasn't designed for your fulfillment. It was built for maximum output. And most people don't resist, not because they agree, but because they don't know any different. When the machine is all you've ever known, even silence can feel like peace. But it's not peace, it's numbness. You're not free. You're just no longer asking questions. The tragedy is that most won't realize they were part of a machine until the engine cuts off, and they're left alone in the quiet, wondering where all the time went. Because when your days are spent chasing deadlines, filling calendars, hitting goals, you lose something sacred. You lose the present. You lose your intuition. You lose the sense that your life is your own. You weren't born to be a cog. You were born to feel, to create, to connect, to wander into the unknown and call it wonder. But systems built on control have no space for that kind of aliveness. They don't fear rebellion. They fear awakened souls. So the system sells you a version of life that feels safe, predictable, structured, respectable. But in the background, almost silently, it drains your spirit drop by drop. And that's the question society never wants you to ask. What if the life I've been living was never really mine? Because once you begin to see the machine clearly, a darker truth comes into focus. It didn't just take your time, it took yourself. It shaped you. Not as a human being, but as a role, a label, a function to be fulfilled. You became the teacher, the doctor, the manager, the engineer, and for most of your life, that title told you who you were. Until one day, it doesn't. Until the meetings stop, the inbox goes quiet, the schedule clears, and suddenly so do you. You're free, but you don't feel free. You feel adrift. Not because you miss the work, but because you no longer know who you are without it. The identity you spent decades constructing, the one the world applauded and rewarded, vanishes, and in its place is silence. The National Institute on Aging reports that depression spikes by more than 40% in the first year of retirement. Not because people run out of money or comfort or time, but because they're left facing a question they've never dared to ask. If I'm no longer working, who am I? This is the hidden crisis, the one no financial advisor warns you about, because this isn't about income. It's about identity. And when your identity was built on output, its disappearance feels like a quiet death, a death that happens while you're still alive, still breathing, but unsure who's left inside. There's a post on Reddit written by a man named John, 64 years old, recently retired after a lifetime working at Boeing. He wrote, "I realized I never actually lived. I just worked. And now that the work is over, I have no idea what to do." His words are raw, unfiltered, and heartbreakingly common, because John's story isn't rare. It's a mirror, a reflection of millions of lives, where job and identity merged so completely that when one ended, the other disappeared too. We're told to strive, to climb, to produce, but no one ever teaches us how to simply be. So when the striving stops, the silence becomes unbearable. Not because it's empty, but because for the first time, you're left alone with yourself, and you're not sure who that is anymore. And in that silence, you feel the weight of everything you once postponed. The curiosities you never chased, the passions you silenced, the parts of you that didn't fit the role. So you left them behind. That's the illusion, that your worth was tied to your usefulness, that your value depended on how well you could perform. But as Alan Watts once said, you are not a role, you are the playing of life itself. You were never meant to be just one thing. Life was never meant to be reduced to a single title, carried like a badge until death. But when the title ends, a void opens. And that void isn't empty. It's full of questions. The kind you didn't have time to ask when the clock dictated your days. What do I love? What moves me? What do I believe in, beyond what I was told? These are the questions that mark the start of real freedom. But they come at a price. The death of the old identity, the unraveling of the mask, the release of the role, the birth of something deeper, something that was always there, just buried. And maybe that's why the system never wanted you to stop. Because in the quiet, you begin to remember who you were before the performance, before the nameplate, before the script. And that memory, that flicker of truth, is the beginning of something the machine cannot touch. A self that is finally, irrevocably free. Not because it retired, but because it awakened. But even then, even after the job ends, the system doesn't let go. It simply hands you a new part to play. Not as a worker, but as a consumer. You don't retire from the system. You retire into another one built to monetize the years you have left. A trillion-dollar industry designed to dress up control as choice. They call it retirement freedom. It comes with cruise packages, real estate dreams, investment seminars, and silver-haired smiles on TV. They say, this is your time to live. But what they're really offering isn't freedom, it's a product. And the product isn't the condo or the trip or the lifestyle. The product is you, or more precisely, your desire to feel in control after a lifetime of being controlled. They sell you comfort because they know you're afraid of chaos. They sell you plans because they know you've never lived without one. And so, even now, in what's supposed to be your liberation, you're still being managed, marketed, contained. Because real freedom, it was never going to come from a brochure. It was always going to come from within. So instead of guiding you inward, toward freedom of the soul, they offer you a new kind of order. External, predictable, a routine of managing, spending, maintaining. Structure dressed up as liberation. And just like that, retirement stops being a milestone. It becomes a market. You're not stepping into discovery. You're entering a demographic, a sales category with a calendar and a credit score. You're not free. You're simply being reabsorbed, softly, politely, into a more refined corner of the same machine. And the most insidious part? It feels reasonable. It sounds responsible. You're told to be smart, meet with financial advisors, optimize your portfolio, maximize your golden years. But no one asks, who really benefits from this plan? Because the truth is uncomfortable. Most financial advice isn't neutral, it's business. And business has an interest. The very institutions preaching freedom are the ones collecting the fees, earning the commissions, charging the interest on the plans they say will liberate you. Your freedom has a price tag, and they're the ones cashing in. We're sold the idea that safety equals freedom, that if you're insured enough, invested enough, prepared enough, you'll finally feel at peace. But Alan Watts saw the trap. The desire for security and the feeling of insecurity are the same thing. To hold your breath is to lose it. The tighter you grip control, the more afraid you become. Because real freedom, it isn't a perfectly managed retirement account. It's not a beachfront condo. It's not a first-class cruise or a senior discount. Real freedom is the ability to see through the illusion, to realize that most of what you were sold as liberation was just another version of control, polished and polite, but still a cage. This doesn't mean rest, travel, or planning are wrong. They only become meaningful when they come from intention, not indoctrination. If retirement is just another checklist, another script handed down to keep you occupied, you haven't escaped anything. You've only changed costumes. And the real tragedy isn't that people want joy after work. It's that they were never taught how to feel joy during it. They were taught to defer, to delay, to survive. And when the moment finally comes to live, they're still asking permission, still following the plan, still living someone else's life. Because freedom isn't found in what you can buy after 65. It's found in the courage to ask, what if I stop buying into the lie altogether? But maybe the lie wasn't just retirement. Maybe the deeper betrayal came long before. Maybe it was the training itself, the way you were taught to obey, to comply, to perform, to become useful, and forget how to be alive. Because from the moment you were old enough to notice the world, you were taught to wait, to postpone joy, to delay your aliveness. First it was, when I graduate. Then, when I get the job. When I get promoted. When I pay off the house. When I retire. Then you'll be happy. Then you'll be free. Then you'll really start living. But then never comes. Because you've been conditioned to chase it. A phantom future, always just out of reach. Like a mirage on the horizon. Each time you move closer, it shifts farther away. Your mind has been trained to reject the now, to dismiss this moment, to believe that real life is later, somewhere else, someday. And this isn't just poetic tragedy. Psychologists have a term for it: delay discounting. The tendency to undervalue what's here in favor of what might come. You start to believe that now is never enough, that joy is always a transaction, earned only after you've suffered enough, proved enough, waited long enough. So you go through life in a kind of spiritual limbo, checking boxes, hitting milestones, saving for a future you've been too distracted to question. You become fluent in survival, but illiterate in presence. You know how to plan a week, but not how to feel a moment. You know how to succeed, but not how to be still, to breathe, to listen to the quiet truth beneath all the noise. And by the time retirement arrives, you don't know how to live, only how to wait. And the real tragedy? You think that's normal, but what you were preparing for wasn't life. It was absence, a slow, subtle kind of death. Because a life delayed is a life unlived. You've spent so long measuring your value by your output, your efficiency, your status, that you've forgotten how to exist without proving yourself. And when the scaffolding collapses, when the job ends, when the title fades, when the roles dissolve, what's left is the aching realization. You never really arrived. You were always en route, always becoming, never being. Alan Watts warned us about this illusion. He said, stop measuring your life, live it. But in a culture that rewards constant movement and punishes stillness, that message sounds radical. We're told that productivity is a virtue, that exhaustion is honorable, that slowing down is failure. So we begin to believe that rest must be earned, that joy must be deserved, that life is a reward, not a birthright. And without knowing it, we spend our entire existence rehearsing for a moment that never arrives, a performance that never begins. But here's the quiet truth. There is no perfect moment, no final destination where everything clicks and nothing hurts. Life is not waiting for you. It's happening, right now, in the mess, in the stillness, in the breath you just took, in the ones you missed. Not later, not someday, now. And if you can't touch it now, you won't touch it later. Because later is just a softer word for never when your life has been shaped by postponement. The system didn't just take your time, it took your presence. It convinced you that being alive was a reward for endurance, that joy must be earned, that existence needs justification. But that was always the lie. You do not need to earn your breath. You do not need permission to feel wonder. You do not need a reason to be awake to your own life. So the real question was never, when will you start living? The real question is, will you ever stop waiting? Because beneath all the myths, all the roles, all the scripts, there's only this, a choice, not a perfect moment, not a polished plan, just a quiet, trembling decision to begin. Because real freedom isn't given. It's not something the system awards you after a lifetime of obedience. It's not packaged in retirement benefits or sold through long-term investment portfolios. Real freedom is a capacity, not a condition. It's not about having more time. It's about reclaiming your presence in the time you already have. Freedom is not escape. It's the ability to meet this life. Not as you hoped it would be, not as they promised it would become, but as it is. Raw, unfolding, alive. And here's the wild part. You don't need to retire to find it. You can awaken inside the very system that tried to keep you asleep. You can retire from the mentality before you ever retire from the job. And it begins here, by redefining who you are. Not by your title, not by your productivity, not by your usefulness, but by what you feel when the noise goes quiet, by what stirs your heart when no one's watching. Maybe you've spent decades as a manager, a provider, a planner, but beneath all that, you were always something deeper, a seeker, a maker, a soul. So build from that center, not with busyness, but with intention. Create a new rhythm, one that honors stillness as much as motion. Carve out time where nothing needs to be achieved or fixed or performed. Time to just exist, to breathe, to feel. That space, unhurried, unmeasured, unowned, is where freedom begins. Not in doing more, but in doing less with more meaning. And when it comes to connection, shift your focus. Don't chase experiences just to fill a checklist or gather memories like souvenirs on a shelf. Choose depth over novelty. Choose people who see you, not just the roles you play. Choose conversations that stir your soul, not just moments that numb or distract. Because beneath all the noise, beneath every plan, every purchase, what we're truly starving for is presence. Presence with each other. That's where meaning lives. Alan Watts said it best. This is the real secret of life, to be completely engaged with the now. And this isn't just philosophy, it's a survival skill. In a world that's always pulling you toward later, toward someday, toward what's next, your ability to return to now is an act of rebellion. Maybe the most powerful retirement of all, retiring from the trance, retiring from the endless chasing, retiring from the lie that life is always just out of reach. You don't have to wait until 65. You don't need the perfect plan. You don't have to have it all figured out. What you need is the courage to stop, to breathe, to ask yourself, what would it mean to actually live today? Not to prepare for life, not to plan for life, but to live it fully, honestly, without the mask, without the timeline. Because the lie was never just about retirement. The real lie was that you ever had to earn your freedom. And the truth is, you were free the moment you stopped waiting.